A prominent American news anchor has posted an emotional video appealing to those who've abducted her 84-year-old mother, Nancy. Authorities said they suspect she was kidnapped, and they're working with the FBI to authenticate a possible ransom note.
For one night, it looked like the Nancy Guthrie case was finally about to break open. Late on a Friday evening, authorities descended on a quiet Tucson neighborhood with overwhelming force. SWAT vehicles rolled into the area. FBI agents moved alongside Sheriff's deputies. Search warrants were executed behind closed doors while flashing emergency lights filled the streets. Then came the detail that instantly changed the mood surrounding the entire investigation. Several people were reportedly detained for questioning. At nearly the same time, another dramatic scene unfolded just a couple of miles away. A silver-gray Range Rover with its license plates concealed was stopped in a restaurant parking lot, surrounded by investigators, and eventually hauled away under heavy scrutiny. Tarps were raised around the vehicle before it was removed, fueling intense speculation across social media and national coverage. For people following the Nancy Guthrie case, this felt different. After more than 100 days without clear answers, many believed investigators had finally found the breakthrough they needed. The images coming out of Tucson looked exactly like the kind of turning point people expect before a major arrest. Tactical teams seized vehicles, multiple scenes, federal involvement. For a moment, it felt like the mystery surrounding Nancy's disappearance might finally be collapsing under the weight of new evidence. But then something unexpected happened. The people questioned during the operation were eventually released without charges. The vehicle that generated so much public attention failed to produce any publicly known breakthrough. And almost as quickly as the excitement arrived, the momentum seemed to disappear. That sudden shift revealed something important about this investigation. The loudest developments may not be the most important ones, because while the public focused on SWAT activity, detentions, and the seized Susuv, investigators may already have been concentrating on something far quieter and far more difficult to understand. A tiny piece of forensic evidence reportedly recovered inside Nancy's home. That contrast sits at the center of this entire case. From the outside, criminal investigations often look dramatic. Search warrants create headlines. Tactical operations dominate television coverage. Rumors spread online within minutes, but inside real investigations, the case itself is usually built somewhere much less visible. Inside laboratories, inside forensic timelines. Inside evidence so small most people would never notice it. And according to reports surrounding the Nancy Guthrie investigation, one of the most important pieces of evidence may be a single rootless hair reportedly found in Nancy's bedroom and later sent to the FBI laboratory in Quantico for advanced analysis. At first glance, that detail sounds insignificant compared to everything else surrounding the case. But experienced investigators understand something the public often forgets. Cases are rarely solved by the biggest moment on television. They are solved by the evidence that survives scrutiny, that may explain why the investigation appears to have changed so dramatically over time. In the beginning, the case looked like an urgent missing person search. Every hour mattered. Search efforts moved quickly. Public appeals intensified. Investigators focused on immediate recovery. But as days became weeks and weeks became months, the investigation appeared to evolve into something else entirely. A long-term criminal investigation focused less on speed and more on proof. And proof moves differently, because once investigators believe a case may eventually end inside a courtroom, every detail becomes critical. DNA has to be tested carefully. Surveillance timelines must be reconstructed. Witness statements need verification. Investigators cannot simply move fast. They have to move accurately. That reality can make a case feel painfully slow from the outside. But it may also explain why so much information surrounding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance has remained hidden from public view. Investigators may not just be searching anymore. They may be trying to prove something, and if that is true, then the most important developments in this case may not be happening publicly at all. They may be happening quietly inside a forensic lab, where investigators are still trying to understand what the evidence inside Nancy's home is actually telling them. The deeper investigators moved into the Nancy Guthrie case, the more the investigation appeared to shift away from public drama and toward forensic evidence hidden almost entirely from view. And that shift may explain why so little information has been released, despite the enormous attention surrounding the case. Because according to reports tied to the investigation, the evidence recovered inside Nancy's home was not simple, clean, or easy to interpret. Authorities later confirmed that blood evidence was found at the scene, and at least some of it reportedly belonged to Nancy. What investigators did not publicly clarify was whether additional unidentified biological material may also have been recovered during processing. That silence created enormous speculation online. But from an investigative standpoint, Withholding forensic details is often intentional. In major criminal cases, investigators sometimes protect information because revealing too much too early can damage the case later. Sensitive details may help verify future confessions, expose false claims, or prevent suspects from adjusting their stories around evidence already known publicly. Still, one detail continues to stand above almost everything else: the rootless hair reportedly recovered from Nancy's bedroom. At first it sounds small, almost insignificant, but in forensic investigations, tiny evidence can become incredibly important precisely because it is difficult to explain away. The problem is that rootless hair is also extremely difficult to test. Unlike hair with an attached root, it often lacks the straightforward cellular material investigators normally rely on for traditional DNA profiling. That forces forensic analysts to work with far more fragile and limited genetic traces. If the sample is degraded, contaminated, or mixed with DNA from multiple people, the process becomes even harder and much slower. That may be one reason the sample was reportedly sent to the FBI laboratory in Quantico, where advanced forensic analysis has continued for months. From the outside, the delay can feel frustrating. Many people assume long periods without arrests mean investigators are lost or out of leads, but sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes investigators move slowly because the evidence may actually matter too much to rush. Every stage has to be handled carefully: extraction, separation, verification, comparison. One mistake can damage the entire evidentiary chain. And in a nationally watched case like this, investigators know that any future prosecution would face enormous scrutiny in court. That may also explain why authorities appear increasingly focused on forensic science rather than public spectacle. Because after the raids, the detentions, and the headlines faded, investigators may still believe the strongest path toward answers lies inside biological evidence that has not yet fully revealed what it contains, especially if they are dealing with mixed DNA profiles. Inside any home, DNA naturally exists everywhere. Family members, visitors, workers, and ordinary daily contact leave behind countless traces over time. The challenge for investigators is separating normal background material from evidence that should not be there at all. And that distinction could become critical in the Nancy Guthrie case. Because if investigators eventually isolate an unidentified profile connected to the scene, it could potentially point them towards someone who had no legitimate reason to be inside the home. But until forensic analysts can verify that evidence with confidence, investigators remain trapped between suspicion and proof. And those are not the same thing. Suspicion creates theories. Proof survives courtrooms. That difference may be why the case has started feeling so quiet publicly, despite remaining extremely active behind the scenes. But biological evidence was not the only thing investigators reportedly struggled with, because another deeply unsettling detail soon emerged from inside the house itself: the possibility that whoever entered Nancy's home may have arrived prepared. If the forensic evidence inside Nancy Guthrie's home represents the quiet side of this investigation, then the surveillance failure may represent the most unsettling side. Because according to reports surrounding the case, investigators believed parts of the home's recording system had either been disabled or rendered useless before critical footage could be recovered. At first glance, that sounds technical, but inside a criminal investigation, it can completely change how detectives understand a crime scene. In modern cases, surveillance footage often becomes the backbone of a timeline. Cameras reveal movement, entry points, vehicles, timing, and behavior. Even blurry footage can help investigators narrow possibilities quickly. But when recording systems suddenly stop working during a disappearance investigation, detectives are forced to consider a darker possibility. Was the failure accidental, or was it intentional? Authorities have never publicly released full details about what happened with Nancy's security setup, but according to reports tied to the investigation, FBI specialists reportedly attempted to recover additional recordings and were unable to retrieve meaningful footage beyond the limited material already discussed publicly. That detail matters because it suggests something more disturbing than random opportunity. Preparation. If someone intentionally interfered with the surveillance system, it could indicate the person understood how the home security worked. It suggests planning rather than panic. And it raises the possibility that whoever entered the property may have been trying to avoid creating the kind of evidence investigators normally depend on. That possibility becomes even more troubling when combined with the limited doorbell footage that has already circulated publicly. The footage reportedly provided only vague details about movement, clothing, and general appearance. Enough to create speculation online, but not enough for a definitive identification. And certainty is exactly what investigators still seem unable to claim. Behind the scenes, authorities reportedly reviewed massive amounts of surveillance footage from nearby neighborhoods, traffic systems, intersections, and private homes. In suburban investigations, the volume becomes enormous very quickly. Hundreds of vehicles, endless movement, hours of footage leading nowhere. Most major investigations do not struggle because there are no leads. They struggle because there are too many weak ones, and that appears to be exactly what happened here. The tip line reportedly received hundreds of calls. Some may have come from people genuinely trying to help. Others likely came from internet speculation or mistaken observations. But investigators still had to process all of them. One lead reportedly involved fingerprints recovered from the scene that initially raised concern before investigators traced them back to a service worker with legitimate access to the property. Another involved gloves discovered roughly 2 miles away from Nancy's home. For a period of time, the discovery appeared potentially important, but DNA analysis reportedly connected the gloves to a restaurant employee with no known involvement in the case. Each false lead consumed time. Each dead end pulled resources away from something else. And then came the ransom messages. Early in the investigation, communications began appearing that claimed Nancy had been abducted and demanded cryptocurrency payments in exchange for information or her return. On the surface, the messages seemed to support a kidnapping theory, but almost immediately, investigators appeared skeptical. The timing felt strange, the delivery methods felt unusual, and according to available reporting, some of the messages were directed toward media outlets instead of privately toward the family itself. That does not fit the pattern investigators typically expect in genuine ransom situations, where direct leverage and speed are usually critical. Then the situation became even more chaotic. Authorities later arrested a California man accused of sending fraudulent ransom demands tied to the case. Investigators reportedly stated he had no involvement in Nancy's disappearance and was instead attempting to exploit the tragedy for money. That arrest answered one question, but it created another. If one ransom message was fake, how many others were fake too? And if fake communications flooded the investigation, did they bury potentially meaningful information beneath layers of confusion? That is one of the dangers investigators face in nationally followed cases. False information does not just distract the public. It actively damages investigative momentum. It overwhelms tip lines, contaminates timelines, spreads misinformation, and forces detectives to waste time separating manipulation from evidence. A fake message can still damage a real investigation. And while the public focused on ransom theories and online speculation, another shift was quietly happening behind the scenes. Because over time, the FBI appeared to become far more than just a supporting agency in the Nancy Guthrie investigation. By the time the Nancy Guthrie investigation moved past the 100-day mark, something important had quietly changed behind the scenes. The public was still focused on raids, forensic testing, ransom theories, and unanswered questions. But according to reports surrounding the case, the communication structure itself had shifted in a way that immediately drew attention. Sheriff Chris Nanos publicly confirmed that he was no longer personally communicating directly with Nancy's family. Instead, the FBI had reportedly become the primary liaison. At first glance, that may sound procedural. In major investigations involving multiple agencies, communication responsibilities can evolve over time, especially when forensic analysis, digital evidence, or long-term prosecutorial strategy become increasingly important. But emotionally, the change landed very differently. For Nancy's family, this was not just an operational adjustment. This was their mother, their uncertainty, their daily reality. And to many people following the case, the transition felt symbolic of something larger happening inside the investigation itself. Because when local authorities step back from direct communication while the FBI becomes the primary point of contact, the public naturally starts asking difficult questions. Has the case become more sensitive, more complicated, or more fragile than investigators are willing to admit publicly? Authorities have not suggested that the shift reflects failure or internal collapse. In fact, limiting information during an active investigation can sometimes be necessary. Investigators often protect details to preserve witness interviews, test future confessions, and prevent critical evidence from becoming contaminated through public exposure. Professionally, that logic makes sense. Emotionally, however, it creates another kind of pain entirely, because silence may protect the case while simultaneously isolating the family living inside it. And according to reports tied to the investigation, frustration reportedly continued building as weeks turned into months without visible progress. Online discussions grew more aggressive. Every public statement became heavily analyzed. Every delayed update fueled another wave of speculation. Then another layer of tension surfaced. Public disagreement appeared to emerge between federal and local agencies regarding aspects of the investigation timeline. FBI Director Kash Patel publicly criticized the handling of the case, suggesting federal involvement should have happened earlier. Separate reporting later indicated that FBI officials pushed back against parts of that narrative, reportedly claiming requests for evidence had already been made before materials were fully transferred. From the outside, it became difficult to know exactly what was operational disagreement, political pressure, or simply the normal friction that develops during high-pressure investigations involving multiple agencies. But for the public, the result felt the same: uncertainty. And once people begin sensing uncertainty inside a major criminal investigation, trust becomes harder to maintain. That tension only intensified when separate controversies involving Sheriff Nanos began attracting public attention. During the same period, the Guthrie case faced growing scrutiny. While no verified public evidence directly connects those issues to Nancy's disappearance, the overlap created even more speculation online. And speculation has become one of the defining forces surrounding this case. That is part of what makes the Nancy Guthrie investigation so difficult to follow responsibly. There is a major difference between investigators hiding answers and investigators still trying to prove them. The public often treats those as the same thing, but they are not. An unanswered question may simply mean the evidence is incomplete. A hidden answer suggests investigators already know the truth and refuse to reveal it. Those are entirely different realities, yet unresolved investigations often blur the line between them, especially when communication becomes limited. Especially when forensic testing stretches across months, especially when the family itself appears increasingly separated from the investigation process. And that separation may be one of the most painful aspects of the entire case. Because while investigators continue reviewing evidence, processing DNA, revisiting tips, and reconstructing timelines, Nancy's loved ones remain trapped inside something much harder to measure scientifically: waiting. Waiting without certainty. Waiting while the entire country debates theories about someone they love. And for Savannah Guthrie, that emotional burden unfolded under a national spotlight. As the Nancy Guthrie investigation stretched deeper into its fourth month, the emotional center of the case slowly became impossible to ignore. Because behind every forensic update, every rumor online, and every unanswered question was still a family living through something no investigation can easily measure: uncertainty. For most people following the case from a distance, the investigation existed through headlines. A search warrant appeared. A new theory spread online. A forensic detail surfaced. Then the news cycle moved forward. But for Nancy's family, nothing moved forward at all. Every day still began with the same unanswered question: where is she? That emotional weight became especially visible through Savannah Guthrie's public response to the disappearance. Shortly after her mother vanished, Savannah stepped away from work for nearly 2 months, and when she eventually returned, she spoke openly about the fear and emotional exhaustion her family had been carrying behind closed doors. What made her comments so painful was not just the grief, it was the guilt. Savannah reportedly admitted she feared her public visibility may somehow have placed her mother at greater risk. The possibility that someone could have targeted Nancy because of her connection to a nationally recognized television figure created an emotional burden few people can truly understand. Most families facing tragedy ask themselves whether they missed warning signs. Very few are forced to ask whether fame itself may have played a role. And that possibility continues to hang over the investigation because authorities have never publicly established a clear motive. The ransom theory has always appeared unstable. The fake ransom demands complicated the situation even further. And if money was truly the goal, many people continue asking the same question investigators themselves have likely considered from the beginning. Why was there never a clear path toward an actual exchange? Why did so much of the communication surrounding the alleged ransom appear delayed, indirect, or chaotic? Those questions have led some observers to believe the ransom narrative may have functioned less like a genuine negotiation and more like confusion layered on top of the crime itself. But without public confirmation from investigators, that remains speculation. And speculation becomes dangerous in unresolved cases, because the longer a disappearance remains unsolved, the easier it becomes for theories to slowly replace facts. That is one reason the emotional impact on families becomes so severe in nationally followed investigations. They are forced to watch strangers debate the worst moment of their lives in real time, often with incomplete information and absolute certainty built on almost nothing. Meanwhile, investigators continue moving at the much slower pace required for evidence. That contrast creates enormous frustration publicly. But privately, it creates something even harder. Hope and grief begin existing at the same time. Nancy's family cannot fully mourn because there has been no confirmed resolution. But they also cannot fully believe everything will end safely because the silence has lasted too long. Every phone call matters. Every tip matters. Every rumor creates another emotional rise and collapse. Even unrelated discoveries can reopen the wound. During the search efforts, authorities reportedly examined human remains discovered miles away from Nancy's home before determining they were not connected to the case. For investigators, moments like that are procedural realities. For families, they become emotional earthquakes. Relief arrives carrying fresh horror behind it. And still, despite everything, Nancy's loved ones continued pushing publicly to keep attention on the case. On Mother's Day, Savannah shared an emotional message saying the family missed Nancy with every breath and would not stop searching until answers were found. That statement reflected something important, often forgotten once investigations become consumed by theories and speculation. Nancy Guthrie is not simply a mystery. She is a person whose absence continues reshaping the lives around her every single day. That reality may also explain why the reward connected to the case continued growing so dramatically. The FBI offered $50,000 for information. Nancy's family reportedly added $1 million. Additional contributions pushed the total reward even higher. In most major investigations, a reward that large generates overwhelming amounts of actionable information. But here, something unsettling happened instead. The silence largely continued. Yes, tips kept coming in. Investigators reportedly continued reviewing witness statements, rechecking surveillance footage, and revisiting overlooked details. But the public still has not seen the kind of breakthrough many expected after so much time. Attention and money became attached to the case, and that forces a difficult possibility into the open. What if investigators are not dealing with a lack of effort? What if they are dealing with a lack of proof? Because those are not the same thing. After more than 100 days, the Nancy Guthrie investigation may now depend less on dramatic raids and more on whether science itself can answer what people still cannot. And that may be the hardest truth surrounding this entire case. Justice is rarely built from the loudest headlines. It is usually built quietly, piece by piece, through evidence strong enough to survive scrutiny. The SWAT raid created headlines. The seized Range Rover created headlines. The ransom notes created headlines. But the investigation itself may still revolve around something much smaller, a strand of hair. DNA investigators may still be trying to separate tiny forensic details the public may not fully understand until much later. That distinction matters because unresolved cases can easily become consumed by internet speculation instead of evidence. And while public attention can help keep a case alive, speculation without proof can also bury the truth beneath noise. In the end, the most important thing to remember about the Nancy Guthrie case is this: behind every theory, every forensic discussion, and every headline is still a missing woman and a family living through unimaginable uncertainty. For the public, this became a mystery. For Nancy's loved ones, it never stopped being real life. And somewhere inside the quiet evidence investigators continue protecting so carefully, they still appear to believe the truth can eventually be found.